Finally, she thought with a smile, and gave her superior a salute as she grabbed hold of the new ID card she had been presented with. This was the beginning of her rise through the ranks. The superior smiled as well, then gave her a nod before walking off at a brisk pace. He probably had more important things to do than hand out those cards, but to Selene, it was a momentous occasion. Her colleagues would laugh at her expression if they could see it at all. She didn't care about that right now. First off, her mask, helmet, and visor hid her face. And secondly, they could make fun of her all they wanted. She had managed to get that promotion not even half a year after joining this site. Selene looked at the small card again. S183 stood at the top of it. That was her official name in this place, because real ones were forbidden. L5 access was imprinted below. She felt a shiver running through her legs as she read it again. Everything in this site here, well, the prison, was structured around its levels. The more important one was, the deeper one was allowed to venture in this place. She had started with L4 5 months ago, and had already managed to get access to one more layer, which also included a pay bump that was really appreciated. If she kept it up, she'd soon see what was hidden at level 10 and below. The things that slumbered down there would give her nightmares. One of her colleagues had told her once, while they had all sat around and waited for one of the older securities to get back to them. Well, yeah, probably, she had answered, but hadn't let it deter her in the least. This site here harbored many of the things normal people would never dream of seeing outside of horror movies and old fairy tale books. And the deeper one got, the worse they were. The first level, L1, was mostly normal stuff one needed for such an installation. A mess hall, barracks, and the administrative offices. From L2 on, though, it got strange. Levels 2 and 3 were for things that were either only as dangerous as a human being, or people who had been possessed once and might become a problem if they were let out. Level 4 harbored things that could already devastate a community in and of itself. She had seen something inside a cell that moved like a dog, yet disappeared in any shadow cast. Disembodied hands that slipped out of the walls. A woman sitting on the floor, peeling strips of her own rotting flesh off her body. Very infectious. One of her security colleagues had warned her. The cells were getting weirder and weirder as well. While up here, on L2 and 3, they looked like pretty normal prison cells. Down below, they either seemed completely reinforced or sometimes made entirely out of metal. She had heard rumors that even lower, below L10, a single cell could take up as much space as a whole floor up here, or sometimes be either flooded or incessantly burning. They were made specifically for a single occupant to hold them and stop them from coming out and going on a rampage. One time, one of the oldest security guards on her team, S117, a person with an L8 access pass, filled her in on the other rumors going around this place. That there were 100 levels and the lowest one was literal hell itself. That a real-life dragon had been caught and stashed somewhere down there. That the organization had managed to capture a god and was using it to power the building. Bullshit, she had thought back then, but the longer she had worked here, the less unlikely she had found all those rumors. There were things in the shadows, her grandma had once told her. Yeah, and now she knew. On level 4, there was a young woman one could mistake for a comatose patient if it wasn't for the fact that she never stopped tossing and turning. Something had gotten into her when she had been about 8 years old, and for the last 15 years she had been imprisoned in a never-ending nightmare, unable to wake up or receive any help. Killing her would set the thing free. So, the organization had decided to keep her alive for as long as possible and study her. Selene hated passing by her cell. It was a stark reminder of how quickly one's life could take a turn for the worse, especially in here. All it took was attracting the attention of the wrong thing, even for a single moment. She shivered at the thought. How many beings were out there intent on hurting or destroying humanity? An incalculable number, one of the eggheads had told her once. Cursed objects, ghosts, things from folklore. Strange gods and even stranger entities without names were all lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. And all humans could do was hunker down and hope that they would take someone else in their stead. A few hundred, maybe thousands of things locked up in this installation were nothing compared to what was really out there. So, the people working in this place should count themselves lucky, since being in here with the entities in confinement was still far less dangerous than simply walking around out there when no one was going to come and help. Selene scoffed and put the ID badge on her uniform and started walking toward one of the elevators. She could finally take a look at the 5th level and see what all the fuss was about. The long metal hallway led up past 2 more cells on her right side. One had a man lying on a bunk, reading a comic book. The second one held a small table with a toaster on top. That was the one door on this level that no one was allowed to open, even if they had access to this floor. Selene had thought about what that thing could really be, of course, but had decided long ago that her curiosity wasn't worth the danger. She hadn't been hired to find that out, but to protect the prison. Her footsteps echoed back from the walls as Selene continued on toward the elevator. Level 5, she thought with a smile. The first time she'd be able to see it. From tomorrow on, she would have to include it in her hourly tours, so it would only be right for her to take a quick glance now and get accustomed to it. She finally reached the 3 elevators on this side of the installation, made sure the scanner caught the code on her ID card, and then pressed the button. It was eerie, not hearing a single sound while the cabin moved toward her. That was one thing newcomers in this place had to get used to. Almost nothing, no machine, no door, really made a noise here. Selene wasn't sure if it was because they used some strange new technology or if they simply WD-40'd the shit out of every single thing. The other difference between this elevator and the ones outside in the real world was that there was no display here where one could see where the cabin was at the moment. Only a blinking arrow told her that the elevator she was waiting for was coming from above her, not the lower levels. Selene smiled. That meant it couldn't be too far off, at least. The elevator arrived, and a bell sound came from a hidden speaker as its door finally opened. Let's get down to L5, she mumbled to herself and felt this strange tension in her core. She was looking forward to seeing the things down there. Would real monsters turn up already? Or would it just be like L4, only slightly stranger? The doors to the elevator closed, and the cabin started descending, L3 passed by. Some of her colleagues would be there right now, walking through the hallways. Maybe she should have looked up the prisoners of L5 beforehand, Selene thought, as she watched the display over the door slowly changing. She would have access to that part of the database already. It listed the inhabitants of each level, their special requirements, and the threat they could pose. But where would be the fun in that? She had done the same when she had gained access to level 4. Gone down there and walked around, looking at the cells one by one to get accustomed to the atmosphere there first. L4 appeared on the display, and suddenly the elevator stopped without making a noise. Selene's brow furrowed. Whoever got on here had to have at least her own clearance level. Maybe it was one of her colleagues, one of the older ones. She heard the bell sound, then watched the door slide open. 2 people, a man and a woman, were standing in front of her. Neither dressed like security personnel nor scientists. They were both wearing suits, didn't have their faces covered, and their expressions were far too easygoing for this place. Alarm bells were going off in Selene's mind. They hardly gave her a glance as they pushed inside and the man pressed something that looked like a coin against the keypad next to the door. Selene's bad feeling from before got worse. She cleared her throat and watched as the woman suddenly turned around and looked her up and down until her eyes stopped on her ID card. A hand stretched out and touched it, while a smile formed on the woman's lips. L5? Nice, she said, then stopped looking at the badge and started staring straight at Selene's eyes behind the visor. She could feel the woman's gaze burrowing right through her. There was no doubt in her mind that this person was seeing her, full visor or not. She's an L5, the woman repeated, then looked back at the man who was now leaning against the wall of the cabin, nodding. Selene instinctively wanted to push her back, but knew that such behavior would lead, at best, to her immediate dismissal. She had no idea who those 2 were or what their position was. The only thing she felt 100% certain in was that they outranked her by leaps and bounds. Congratulations, S183. The woman piped up again, now using her assigned name. You have been temporarily promoted. Just follow along, and we'll even give you a letter of recommendation afterward. How does that sound? The question wasn't a question at all. Selene knew that she wasn't asking, but ordering her. So she nodded silently, and the woman's smile disappeared in an instant. There wasn't much one could do in such a situation, one of her colleagues had told her. It wasn't like she could go to some kind of HR department in this place. The running joke around here was that whoever complained would get fed to the dragon on L90 as a snack. She didn't find it funny right now. Great. Then it's settled, the woman said without a smile and turned away, but kept one hand on Selene's shoulder. That wasn't an accident either, she knew. It felt like she wanted to make sure she wouldn't run. No chance of that happening now either, she thought with a grim expression, hidden by the mask and helmet. They passed by the 5th floor without stopping, and Selene felt her stomach cramping up. Apparently, the man had overridden her input to go even deeper. Then, what was she doing here? What good could some halfway green hire do down there? L6 passed by, and still the elevator wasn't stopping. L7, L8, L9. She could feel her heart beating faster and faster. Yeah, she had dreamed of one day reaching those levels, but not like this. Not now. She wasn't prepared in the least. The woman's hand on her shoulder gripped her tightly, as if she could read her thoughts. Just stay calm and do what we say, she explained again, but Selene couldn't even nod in response. The gun on her hip felt heavy. Indeed, the whole atmosphere seemed to change as they continued descending. She could feel a thrumming in her ears, as if something was making waves in the air. What kind of creatures were down here? Real monsters, she thought. Ones she wouldn't even see in her nightmares. And yet, the elevator wasn't stopping or even slowing down. L10. L11. People who worked down here had to have rigorous background and mental checks. She knew that from one of her colleagues. It was like standing in a lab with highly contagious materials, he had told her. What a dumb comparison, she now thought. Those things in normal labs don't have consciousness. They don't want to hunt, corrupt, or devour the people working with them. L12. The temperature seemed to drop considerably, and Selene started trembling in her uniform. It wouldn't be so bad if the woman beside her showed at least a tiny smidge of discomfort. But she didn't. Selene kept stealing glances at her and found her now smiling softly while she watched the door. Should she ask them where they were taking her? No. Judging by the expression of the man standing by the wall, they wouldn't like being questioned. Not at all. Especially not by someone like her. Maybe she could ask them to take someone else. Someone who would actually be authorized to move on whatever level they were going to visit. No chance. She could feel it. Maybe they waited for an elevator with someone like her already on. The way the woman had deputized her, for lack of a better word, seemed far too deliberate to be coincidental, right? L13. The elevator stopped, and Selene could hear the bell sound before the door slowly opened. She looked at the woman, who was still staring straight ahead. Just keep calm and stay by my side, she whispered, and Selene felt the tremors running through her legs get even stronger. The hallway they were all looking into now seemed like a carbon copy of every single level above. It had the same metal panels on the sides, the same fluorescent tubes on the ceiling, and the same rough metal floor as everywhere else. But it felt different. The air was vibrating in here, and pretty much every single instinct in Selene's body told her not to take a step outside the elevator. This had to be what early humans had felt like before they had managed to tame fire, when the night had still been something to fear. She swallowed hard and felt fingers digging into her uniform right above her shoulder. The woman was getting ready to drag her out by force, Selene realized, and she had to fight to stop herself from trying to push her away. Raising a hand to her would have dire consequences, she cautioned herself, and felt a tug on her shoulder as the woman started to walk. She had no choice but to follow. They stepped out of the elevator, and Selene heard the door shut behind her. In her mind, it made the sound of a coffin lid falling in place. Don't even start, she hissed at herself in her thoughts. Getting nervous was already bad. She had no idea what kind of things would be down here, or how they would react to her presence. They were at level 13, 8 floors deeper than she had clearance for. There could and would, in all likelihood, be things down here she couldn't even imagine. Maybe even something that could feed on her fears. She needed to calm down, and stop panicking. Selene looked over and found herself right in the middle between the man and the woman. They were walking beside her, making sure she wouldn't try to run. A part of her mind warned. She felt less like part of a team and more like a condemned person getting dragged toward the execution. There was a gun in her holster, Selene reminded herself. Yeah, and she couldn't use it. What was she planning? Killing them both, then running away? Where to? The elevator wouldn't work for her. Not with her ID. She would need to shoot them and then steal from them and then hope that whoever was in control here wouldn't execute her on the spot. There was no way people would believe her, and even less chance of making it to a trial. She'd probably end up in one of the cells as food, she thought with a grimace, and shook her head. No, the time to resist wasn't now. She wasn't even sure if there had been any at all. The moment they had stopped the elevator, she had been nothing but a pawn. It won't be long now. We just need your help with a small job. And then you get the letter of recommendation. The woman promised again, and Selene felt her stomach dropping once more. The offer sounded hollow in her ears. She wasn't sure what they were up to, but Selene doubted they would need to write a letter on her behalf. Who would recommend a corpse, after all? No, she hissed at herself in her mind. If they wanted her dead, they would have taken away her gun, right? Even those two had to be afraid of being shot if they put her in danger, right? The man's hand found her other shoulder as they walked along the almost completely silent hallway, and now Selene started to realize what was bothering her so much. There were no doors in the walls, no cells, or at least no entrances to them. It all looked exactly the same, wall after wall with nothing on it. If it hadn't been for that strange phenomenon of the air vibrating, one might think there was nothing down here. But there was. She felt it deep inside of her. This strange tension, this fear that seemed to grow with every step she took. What kind of job? Selene finally asked, and the woman shot her a sideways glance before she smirked. One you can do, I promise you. We would do it ourselves, but he might react negatively to our presence. You just have to talk to him and keep him engaged for a bit. Then you can come out and your job is done. Selene tried to stop, but two hands pulled her along. What did she mean by come out? Were they going to toss her into a cell? She looked over, her eyes wide from shock, still hidden by the visor, and the woman seemed to know what she wanted to ask. Don't worry. You won't be in the real cell. It has a kind of observation room next to it, so he won't be able to get to you, and you can even keep your gun. I know you've been itching to draw it since we left the elevator. That last sentence was meant to mock her, she knew. The woman was having fun with her, yet Selene knew she couldn't fight back in any meaningful way. She needed to play along and then hope to never see either of them again. What a shit day, she thought, as they reached the first intersection and turned left. Selene's heart almost jumped out of her chest. There, right in front of her, was a door. One built differently from anything she had seen on the upper floors. It looked like the entrance to a bomb shelter, with heavy metal plates on each side, ready to slide in place and lock it down at a moment's notice. Her feet stopped, but the two walking on either side of her simply dragged her along. A slightly metallic smell hit her nose. Blood was in the air. She almost threw up into her mask, and noticed her two superiors wrinkling their noses as well. The words, "feeding time," were whispered between them, and now Selene really was about to pull her gun. A hand grabbed her wrist before she could do it, though, while the woman dragged her on and only stopped right in front of the cell. Her body was shaking as she looked up. 13-01 were the letters engraved over the entrance. "Don't worry, feeding time has already passed. So you should be even safer, S183. The woman explained, then gave her colleague a nod. The hand keeping her wrist from the gun disappeared, and Selene put it onto the butt of her weapon in an instant. Carefully, the woman grabbed the back of her head and turned it until she was forced to look at the door more closely. There was a small window with thick glass looking inside a room that seemed doused in red light. "That's the room you need to enter. We will wait outside, ready to jump in if anything happens," the woman promised. It was a lie. Selene knew it instantly, and yet she couldn't think of a single way out. She felt her pulse racing as the door in front of her opened with hardly more than a whispered hiss, and cold air blew straight into her face. A hand gave her a shove, and she stumbled in before the door fell shut again behind her. Every single instinct in her mind screamed at her to run back out, that she was in mortal danger, but as soon as Selene raised her head, she froze. One wall of the room was made of glass, looking into the real prison, and what she saw there made her involuntarily hold her breath. Everything was doused in dark red light, metal walls, a metal ceiling, and a stained metal floor. And sitting in the middle of that room was a dark, huddled figure. Selene felt the presence immediately and reached down to the butt of her gun again, but froze as soon as her fingertips brushed against the object. The air was vibrating around her, and the figure began to move. Not quickly, no. It looked strangely disinterested as it unfurled what seemed to be a single arm, then another, and another. Selene felt her legs starting to shake. She had seen and heard of things down here that were strange, but this one gave off the worst vibes she had ever encountered. Slowly, it rose up, using all three of its arms to push a small, dark body off the floor. And yet, she still couldn't quite comprehend its appearance. It did have two legs, like a human, but there was no neck or head or anything like that. The upper body was just a black, indistinct mass that seemed to flow and shift as it moved toward the window separating them. A hand, looking almost human but with a dark blue taint in the red light, touched the glass. And suddenly, Selene felt like she had lost her footing on the ground. The sensation of falling gripped her and made her wobble and then sink down to the floor in another instant. What was she doing here? The woman had told her something. She had a job to do, she knew, but couldn't remember for the life of her. Her legs didn't work anymore. She felt this cold sweat breaking out all over her body, and her eyes were being drawn to the sight of the hand resting on the glass. She couldn't help it. Something touched her forehead through the helmet and the visor. An invisible finger seemed to slowly pierce her skin, yet she couldn't even raise her hand to defend herself. It probed her mind, she realized, but she felt completely defenseless. Deeper and deeper it pushed into her brain. Selene could see her own memories playing like a movie in front of her. Her first day at work here. Parents, siblings, and friends. Laughing, crying, and screaming at each other. She felt like her whole body was on fire as this strange, malevolent presence burrowed into her mind and her life. It was looking for something, she realized. The memories got clearer. She could see herself lying on the grass, holding a broken arm when she had been 12. Then blood trickling from her hand at her friend's birthday party at 15. Her own face, crying in the mirror 3 years ago. It was looking for painful memories. A car crash, more heartbreak. Even the time one of her fingers had gotten caught in the door of her car. Selene felt herself screaming, then got a shock as she looked up and saw herself standing there by the glass front, one of her arms extended and her palm pressed against the cold window. Her hot breath was fogging up the pain in front of her, while the thing on the other side seemed to shift and move with every beat of her heart. It was controlling her, Selene realized, and felt another chill. She couldn't step back or even pull her hand from the glass. Darkness encroached on the red light around her, and the unseen finger pushed into her mind again. Only this time, it wasn't her memories she was seeing. Instead, she found herself in absolute darkness at the bottom of a cave. Things were swirling around her as two people entered the den. There was a bright light, then pain, worse than anything she had ever experienced. She got pulled out of her home and dragged into a steel cage. Searing air sizzled her skin. She was drowned, electrocuted, and burned again and again. Needles were pricking her skin. Razors cut deep into her body. People were talking, yet she couldn't see them. It was this thing's experiences, she realized, what they had done to it. How they had tested it, tortured it, and experimented on it. Selene cried out in pain and fear, then suddenly found herself back in the room with red light again. The thing was looking at her. She could feel it. Her whole body was trembling. One hand was on the glass, while the other hand now pulled out the gun. She still wasn't in control, while her finger flicked off the safety and raised the weapon. "No!" she hissed, but no sound came out of her throat. It wanted to kill her. The arm holding the gun rose up as she still struggled to break free of its control. Where was the woman who had put her in here? She had promised to protect her, right? Why hadn't she entered yet? Selene howled in her mind and felt the cold metal of the gun's barrel touching her skin, right beneath her chin. Why? How? Her whole body was trembling except the arm with the weapon. The thing in front of her was staring into her soul. She didn't want this. She needed to live. Selene felt tears streaming from her eyes, seeping into the mask covering her mouth and nose. Her finger touched the trigger, and then stopped there. She felt her eyes finally leave the thing, glancing at the door by her side. It was waiting, she realized, for someone to open the door and burst into the room. It didn't want her. No, this thing. It wanted the woman and the man waiting outside to enter this place. The gun in her hand was trembling now as well. If they came in, would this monster let her go? Selene could feel the anger flowing from this thing. She was nothing more than bait, but she also knew that neither the woman nor the man would ever set foot in here to save her. They had thrown her in to see this thing's reaction. Didn't it realize it? Or was that something it couldn't understand? Selene saw a shadow in front of the door. They were playing with it, giving it hope. She felt her finger leaving the trigger as it started to shake. It didn't want to kill her either. A clicking noise cut into the silence as a loud hum filled the air. Selene heard an inhuman scream in her mind, a split second before suddenly the light around her turned bright as electricity surged through the cell and she felt it shooting into her body. The gun slipped from her hand as the shock took her off her feet and the creature on the other side of the glass began to screech. She could feel every muscle in her body cramping up, yet the electricity wasn't stopping. Painful white light blinded her as she tried to scream through gritted teeth. The thing in the other room was howling. She heard it out loud and in her head. The connection was still there, and the pain it was going through flooded Selene's mind. An eternity seemed to pass, while the stench of burned hair and flesh filled her nostrils, before finally unconsciousness took her and dragged her into a dark abyss. She was dreaming. Selene knew. Reliving memories that somehow weren't hers. Riding a bike, but her 3 arms didn't fully fit on the handles. Sitting in a dark cave with the gun in her hand, feeding on something she couldn't even describe. Pain suddenly flooded her mind again as a growl came out of her throat and she sat up. Her whole body ached and burned. She could still smell the stench of charred flesh and hair, but now found herself sitting on a metal floor in red light. Her uniform was gone, as was the gun, and as she tried to move again, more pain seemed to sear her mind. Every part of her was burned up, turning her skin into what felt like a mass of dark scabs. But worse than all of it was this feeling in her mind. Something was moving around in there, nesting somewhere in her brain. Selene screamed and felt broken teeth scraping over her swollen tongue. Where was she? This wasn't her normal cell. No, wait, she shouldn't be in a cell at all. Her memories seemed hazy, fuzzy. She wanted to go home, back to her cave. No, apartment. She groaned and growled and looked up, only to see a mirrored glass pane instead of a wall on one side of her room. Someone was there. She could feel it so clearly. And that someone was someone she knew. Selene groaned as she tried to get up again, but simply collapsed once more. Don't strain yourself. The voice of the woman from the elevator suddenly rang in her ears. It hurt. Everything hurt. And in her mind, something that felt like a tendril was burrowing around. S183. No. Sorry. Selene was your name, right? She tried to lift her head, but the muscles in her arms and legs didn't listen to her. They were torn to shreds and charred, she knew. Everything is okay. You don't have to fight it. You did a wonderful job, Selene. We finally found out how they can multiply. Thanks to you, the voice continued, now sounding so happy with herself, while her shrill tones seemed to cut straight into Selene's mind. She tried to get up once more. It was a mistake. She shouldn't be here. Selene wanted to scream, but nothing came out of her mouth. Agonizing pain shot through her whole body. You are dangerous now, so I hope you understand that we can't let you out just yet. It wouldn't be safe for you either, Selene. That voice, it grated her nerves. She growled as she finally managed to get up onto her knees. I'm not a monster! I'm human! She wanted to scream, but that thing in her mind suddenly bit down and made her whole body collapse on the floor. Blood was trickling from her mouth and onto the metal blocks she was lying on. This was a mistake. They had to let her out. Selene felt the woman turn and leave before she heard the door open and then close again. The red light around her never flickered or dimmed. Down there on level 13, she was lying, screaming silently, while something in her mind started to feed and grow.